Hello and welcome back to week 6, our final week. Today we'll be focusing on digital techniques or digital technologies used for archaeological illustration. As usual, there's a lot to get through, so let's get into it. There are quite a few digital techniques or technologies that archaeological illustrators use or can use. Some are more complicated than others, but these techniques can include, but are certainly not limited to, 3D modeling or photogrammetry, Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator. Some of these technologies you may or may not be familiar with, and some you may have had some or maybe a lot of experience with. Some of these techniques already, but I will take you through them one at a time. We'll start with Adobe Photoshop, move into 3D modeling or photogrammetry, and then end with Adobe Illustrator, where I will give you a very quick walkthrough using the pen tool, because I think that's one of the trickiest elements in using Illustrator. And then to end our final week, a quick discussion about what an archaeological illustrator is. The article for this week, the Nyland article, talks a bit about what an archaeological illustrator classifies as and where our place really is within the field of archaeology. How is Adobe Photoshop an application that people use for beauty photos, putting absent family members into pictures, used in archaeology? Well, to start, it can be very useful for archaeology of architecture and for restoration plans. It can be used to fix images of buildings to show how a structure would look if restored, or to show anomalies. It can also be used to touch up old photos for archive work or for conference posters. Well, we don't have time to run through every technique today. There are quite a few good instructional videos on YouTube that can show you basic Photoshop techniques. While it can be useful if using Photoshop for publication, it should always be stated that the photos have been altered. Well, I can't demonstrate as I don't have Photoshop. Here with this photo, some things we could do, for example, would be we could brighten it. We could fill in missing or darkened dirty bricks by copying a swatch of existing brick and placing it over the top. We could remove the background, such as the sky and the grass. If we were doing a bid or a pitch for a restoration project of, a historically significant building, or if we wanted to do a dig on an existing building that we think there might be a foundation wall or something that's not showing up in the above ground structure or in old plans, and we need to provide images of what we might be looking for, we could make this building look complete, or we could use a rendering of the inside to show where we think that this wall or whatever might be by photoshopping it in. For 3D modeling or photogrammetry, this type of 3D modeling is different than that used in Adobe Illustrator, which we will get to in a bit, because it uses actual photos to make a realistic 3D rendering or 3D model of your artifact or site or whatever you're doing. So how is this done? Well, this is done by taking a ton of photographs, and by a ton I mean a lot, and putting them into a program like AgiSoft, for example. The process involves taking a photo of an object. If it's a small artifact, usually place it on something on a table, and then you can move the camera around. But you start with a photo of an object, and then you move the camera over a third and take a picture, and then you move it over another third and take a picture. And then you repeat this the whole way around. So I would show you an example, but unfortunately the software for photogrammetry is quite expensive and takes up a lot of memory on a computer. But rendering these models after you've uploaded all of the photos from the different angles and everything can take anywhere from 10 minutes to complete your rendering, or it could take 30 minutes or longer based on how big the rendering is, how many photos you have, how fast your computer is, etc. So usually, unless your employer is paying for the software, it's not really something many people have, but it is very useful. It's very fun because once your info is put in and rendered, you can take the model, you can like click on it, and you can turn it any way you want. You can turn it upside down, you can see the back of it. And this is really useful for artifacts that are very fragile. So you may be able to take out this artifact, for example, an iron sword, and take pictures of it very carefully, but you don't want to be getting it out all the time. So you take your pictures, you put it into AgiSoft or something, you get your 3D rendering, and then you can look at that sword in a 3D manner whenever you want without harming the artifact, because archaeology is destructive enough. It's very useful when we can use tools like this for very delicate artifacts. And while artifacts are probably the most common type of use for this technology, it can also be done with sitemaps, which is really cool to look at, because now you can look at the site or architecture from any angle. You could potentially take each layer of your unit also and layer them on top of each other, so you can kind of have this 3D layered effect and then be moving it around everywhere. So architecture and site plans are a little trickier to achieve because the bigger the object or the more angles you need to take pictures from. If you're outside, the lighting can add problems. The more pictures you have to take, and it can get quite hard to reach some of these things. If they're very large, you have to figure out how to get up there. You also have to take the picture concurrently, so you don't forget where you were. Positioning is key with photogrammetry, or you could end up with an odd or incomplete model. I've seen them before where you take one picture out or you change one point slightly for a map, and it kind of messes up the whole thing. So this image here is an example of a tombstone from a site that they had taken pictures of, and you can see that they took pictures of the whole site, and then they're specifically pointing out this tombstone that they have made a 3D rendering of. Adobe Illustrator is probably the second most used technology in archaeology behind GPS mapping. So it's like digitally drawing everything we previously hand drawn. It can also be used to make a 3D image of a drawing. Not the same as the photogrammetry. It won't look as realistic as a photogrammetry rendering, but you can do it. Photogrammetry is much more detailed and obviously uses photos of things instead of illustrations. However, with Illustrator, the pen tool, which is the main tool used, can take some getting used to before you get good or quick at it. When you use Illustrator, you first start out with a background layer, which is usually, the drawing you did in the field, or a photo of the artifact. And then using the tools, you lock that layer in so it's not going to change. And then you create another layer on top, and you start using the pen tool to trace around the image. I'll show you sort of how that works in a minute. The reason it can be difficult to use is because it's not like hand drawing with, for example, like an eye pencil on an iPad. You're not free drawing. You have to take the points and connect them. And if you're not careful, you can end up with inverted shapes, or when you zoom in, it's not exactly how you drew it before. It took me a while to get a handle of the pen tool. I'm still not as fast as one of my instructors in grad school was. So what can you illustrate with Adobe Illustrator? Pretty much anything. Artifacts tend to be the most common, along with site plans and stratigraphic maps like this one you have here. Artifacts tend to be a bit more complicated than site plans because the lines usually aren't as symmetrical or rigid. They tend to be more curved depending on what you're illustrating. And when you get down to details such as shading, it can be hard to get it right or to get the different tools to cooperate. For me, Illustrator takes much more time and patience than hand drawing with a pencil. But if you're especially good with computers, this may be a better option for you. One nice thing about Adobe Illustrator is that there is an effect you can use to get the stippling over the whole object instead of having to do it by hand, which is time consuming. Unfortunately, I can't show you, but you enter in the gradient and angle you want, like I've told you, the light coming in at a 45-degree angle from the left. You can enter in all that information, and then it stipples the drawing according to your specifications. It's really cool. So this is an example of a stratigraphy map of a piece of Hadrian's Wall. And you can see it gets sort of complicated in the middle, and it might seem a little bit cluttered, but it's actually a lot less cluttered than the original one that I was going over. It took some creativity, and it took a lot of time because I was doing it on my iPad instead of on the computer, and the pen tool is slightly different on the iPad than computer. But you can see there's no like messy pencil marks anymore. You can't see where you erased anymore. So there are a lot of benefits to these technologies. I don't currently have any current archaeological works that I can show with you at present that I'm allowed to. So I just kind of free drew something to kind of show you, and we'll go through this. So imagine this is a stratigraphy drawing. So you're going to take and place your dots. I'm using an eye pencil on my iPad. So you want to make sure that the last dot you placed, last point you placed is blue before you place another one, or it'll go all wonky. And then on the pencil on the iPad, you double click that blue dot if you need to make it curved instead of a line. So I zoomed in here. That's a really nice feature of technology too. You can zoom way in and you can get that really fine tuned drawing. Here you can see me curving the line instead of making it angular. And like I said, it always needs to be blue at the end before you place another dot. And then you always need to connect the ends or it will get really funky. And if you're going to be adding in different levels of the stratigraphy, for example, you need to close off one layer, so it needs to be a complete shape, not just tracing a line. It needs to be a complete shape, and then lock in that layer. So anything else you're doing, it doesn't accidentally connect it to another point. So it'll show you here in a minute how when I finish this, I lock in that layer, and then I start with another one. You can move the points around too. The idea is to not have a ton of points because it gets kind of sloppy. You want to get good enough that you have enough points but not too many, and you can use the angle tool to kind of fine tune it. So here I'm locking in that layer, and then I'm starting on another one so I don't mess up the previous thing that I did. There's also a feature where if you need to, for example, repeat a straight line or a rock, you can copy it and you can paste it along so you're not having to constantly redraw the same thing. So that line is all black now because it is locked in, and now I have started my new layer. And when I say layer, I'm talking about digital layers. So that first one we drew is the bottom layer, and then this is the next layer, not the layers of stratigraphy. If you have Adobe Illustrator, or even if you don't, you can do a free trial. I highly suggest playing with the pen tool, especially if you want to be a professional archaeological illustrator, or if it's just something you think you might use in your profession, because it does take some time getting used to it. And the first pen tool stratigraphy map that I did, there were a lot of tears because I kept not closing lines or not locking in layers. And so it would go all funky and I'd have to restart. And it was really hard. It was really frustrating and difficult. So here I'm just, finishing it up. Looks kind of funky. But now we're locking in this layer too. These last 6 weeks, we have discussed everything from the history of archaeological illustration to hand-drawing ceramics and lithics to site plans and stratigraphy, and today digital technologies that are ever-evolving. But archaeological illustration, with its ever-evolving technologies, is also ever redefining what an archaeological illustrator is. So what is an archaeological illustrator? An archaeologist? An artist? What is archaeological illustration? An art, a science, archaeology, a subdiscipline, or a little bit of everything? Should every archaeologist be required to spend a little time learning the techniques of an illustrator? These are ongoing discussions in the world of archaeology and academia. Once thought a useful and must-teach skill, now is pushed to the side, assuming everyone can learn the new digital ways of illustration on their own. However, the foundation of archaeological illustration and the priceless things you pick up from holding an artifact, from using your own hands to turn one over, to pick up a pencil and stare and draw and see, what you see and what you feel to draw, that will forever be the cornerstone of this discipline. Of course, digital tools have a very worthwhile and ever-increasing presence in the world of archaeology. Our world is forever getting more technological, and technology inevitably makes things more accessible to people. School children in the United States can take a digital tour of Roman tombs. University students in China uploading their 3D models of an artifact to the internet can allow an alien grandmother in Denmark who has always wanted to go to China but can't to see these things from every angle. We need archaeology to be more accessible, but for students wishing to become archaeologists, there will never be a way to more thoroughly appreciate an artifact than holding it and drawing it with your own hands. I just wanted to say a quick thank you for joining me for these last 6 weeks. I have had an amazing time teaching you all about the basics of archaeological illustration. You can always find me through Save Cultural Heritage Project on my Instagram, my YouTube channel, or my LinkedIn. And again, just thank you so much for taking the time, your precious time, to join me for these last 6 weeks. I hope you learned something. I hope you had fun. And don't forget the due date for all the class materials is September 29th. But thank you, and hopefully I'll see you guys again soon.